Hey guys, Telegram Sam here. If you don't already know, I have an Instagram. It's Telegram underscore Sam underscore Vinyl. So if you're on Instagram, check me out there. And Maggie really wants to be involved in this video right now. Um, but this week's video, I am just doing another version. I did one of these videos a while back, probably like 7-9 months ago, where I showed 5 music books and paired them with an album that I think would go well while reading that album. So yeah, first off, let's start off with one of my favorites I read in the last couple of years. This is Unrequited Infatuations by Stevie Van Zandt. For those of you who aren't familiar with Stevie Van Zandt, he was part of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. He had his own solo band for a while. Just such a great lover of music, and he was an actor. He was in Sopranos, which is considered one of the greatest TV shows ever, and he was in Lilyhammer, which I think was the first original ever Netflix show that was on their streaming service. So he has such a great and vast career, and I love how through this you can just really feel his love for music. Not only does he talk about all the behind the scenes stuff of working with Bruce Springsteen and the drama of him leaving the E Street Band to go try and do his own solo thing when E Street Band and Bruce were at the top of their game. And he acknowledges that was a pretty bad move, and if he could have gone back, he would have never made that choice. But also his philosophy of life in music and how he went undercover in apartheid South Africa, and all of his great charity work. And it's so well written, and you can really feel his character and his voice throughout it. It's a pretty dense book, but you got some pictures interspersed. He got married by Lil Richard. Like, how cool is that? Yeah, he has this great picture of him and James Gandolfini from The Sopranos. Yeah, he just has such an amazing story, such a great life, and now that he's on the chair of I think it's like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he's always trying to advocate for lesser known bands, especially like older bands from the 60s and 50s. And yeah, he's just so awesome, and again, just a great lover of music, and you can really hear that it's not all about him and how great he is. I love when people write biographies and they can be true to themselves and not try to make it out to seem that they're everything in a bag of diamonds, So, and for my album, I didn't pick, even though I do have one of his solo albums, I think I picked this one. The River by Bruce Springsteen. I personally, this is my all-time favorite Bruce Springsteen album. I love Bruce Springsteen. I have most of his albums, and this was the only one that he co-produced with Stevie Van Zandt. So you can really hear Stevie Van Zandt's fingers on this. Yeah, and this was his only double album, I think, ever. And I think they ended up like recording 50 songs that they later did for like a box set that came out in the 2000s, where they released all of the material they recorded for this. But yeah, just such a great album, and it takes you on such a roller coaster. One of my all-time favorite songs ever is Point Blank off of this album. That's such a beautiful song. It's so heartbreaking but so beautiful at the same time. But yeah, I think this is a great companion album to that book. Next up, we have Girl in the Band by Kim Gordon. Kim Gordon, bassist, singer for Sonic Youth, one of the most influential noise alternative rock bands of all time, and she was such a figurehead for that movement, not only just her singing style and her bass playing, but just being a woman in a predominantly male genre. And she just kicked ass, and she made it look so effortless. And yeah, she was just so cool. And I love reading about her, adolescence, growing up in California. I think her and Danny Elfman went to the same school. I think I remember her talking about how her and Danny Elfman kind of had a thing for a little bit when they were in school together. Uh, but yeah, obviously talking about, moving to New York in her 20s, working some, temp secretary jobs, meeting Thurston and being a part of the sort of art and music scene in New York during the 80s. And, obviously starting Sonic Youth together, falling in love with Thurston more, and, them getting married and having their daughter, and also what it's like being a mom while you're in a big touring band, and her starting her own clothing company with Sofia Coppola, and the uh, dissolvement of her marriage with Thurston Moore, and then her Sonic Youth, and then towards the end she kind of talks about how she wants to be an interior designer, how she kind of wanted to move into that. And yeah, just kind of taking it slow now that she is retired or was retired from music. But yeah, such a great book. She is so freaking cool. And I got to see her a couple months ago, and it's one of those concerts that will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was just so cool to be in the presence of someone who I admire so much, and yeah, just really great book. And so I had to show her first debut album, and so far her only debut solo album. This is No Home Record. Kim Gordon, obviously. But yeah, such a great mix. It's so different than, what you would expect from someone coming from Sonic Youth. She has a lot of like trap hip hop influence on here, which I think is really cool. And obviously just straight up balls to the wall noise rock. Listen to Murdered Out. That is a freaking killer song. Yeah, it just makes you want to like destroy stuff. It's so awesome. But yeah, such a great album. Next up, we have No One Here Gets Out Alive, the autobiography of Jim Morrison by Jerry Hopkins and Danny Sugarman. Funny story, I almost got that tattooed on my chest instead of They're Out There, but I thought that was a little spicy and a little aggressive for a very visible chest tattoo, so I decided to go with my One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest one. But Jerry Hopkins wrote like the definitive Elvis biography, and Danny Sugarman was very close to the band, and especially Jim Morrison. He was sort of their side man. He would get them stuff while they were on the road, like if they needed food or beer or drugs, like he would get for them, and he was just a really close companion to everyone that was involved in the Doors. But so it's like a pretty dense book. It's about almost 400 pages long, but yeah, it goes through Jim's adolescence. Obviously him coming to California to go to college, and then meeting Ray Manzarek, and then forming the Doors, and all the behind the scenes stuff of what it was like in the studio with the Doors, and obviously his very tragic and untimely death. But since Dave Sugarman was so involved with the band, you really get some behind the scenes snippets of what Jim Morrison was really like. Like he tells a story of how Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin got into a fight, and Jim Morrison shoved Janis Joplin through a coffee table and broke it. And towards the end, seeing Jim Morrison destroy himself with alcohol and psychedelics, and Jim Morrison would go on these tirades, and even though he was pissed off of beer, having Danny force him to go get him beer or else he would be fired. And, that struggle he had of, like, I need to do this because he's my boss, but I don't want to do this because I see him destroying himself, and he's my friend. I don't want him to die and, like, ruin his chance of being this amazing, being a part of this amazing band. So you really get to see not only the personal side of Jim and the Doors, but also the outside perspective of how important he is, not only to the 60s subculture and the sort of mythos of Jim Morrison. So yeah, it's nice that you get to sort of dive into the myth, but also get to see the reality of who he was. So And for the companion album, I chose The Doors' last album, LA Woman. I honestly think this is probably their best album. It just is so. I don't know. Every time I listen to it, I just think of 60s California in the summer, and you just. Riders on the Storm is such a great closing track, probably one of the greatest closing tracks ever on an album, because it just really seals the deal of how important and how great the Doors were, and I think that's such a song that'll stand the test of time, really. Next up, we have Jocko by Bill Mikowski. Jocko, this is the biography of the great, probably a lot of people would consider him the greatest bass player ever, Jocko Pastorius. He predominantly played jazz, sort of fusion jazz. Again, it's kind of like one of those tragic genius stories. He essentially taught himself how to play bass when he was a kid and a teenager, and he was on the road with a lot of Florida bands like Wayne Cochran. He had the crazy big white hair, but he played in Wayne Cochran's band for a while, and then he would kind of just ditch and do his own solo things or do session work for some local Florida musicians until he finally got his big break when he met, I think it was the drummer of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Jocko was very cocky, and anyone he met who he knew was in the music business, he would introduce himself and be like, "Hi, I'm Jocko Pastorius, and I'm the greatest bass player that's ever lived." And of course, people would be very intrigued by that and see if this guy was really bullshitting. And yeah, the drummer from Blood, Sweat, and Tears was really impressed by him and brought him to New York to play on some of his solo albums. And he ended up meeting Ian Hunter, and he played on Ian Hunter's solo stuff from Mott the Hoople. And that's how he fell into meeting the guys from Weather Report, which is where a lot of people were introduced to Jocko. And just blowing them away. I think he played for Weather Report for 5 or 6 years before his drug and alcohol abuse sort of imploded, and plus he had a lot of underlying mental health problems, and I think he only did one solo album of note. I think maybe he did two, but I think his self-titled one is the one most people know him from. But yeah, it's just a sad tale because he essentially was homeless for a really long time on the streets of New York and just very belligerent and erratic. He was drunk a lot of the time, and he unfortunately ended up going to Florida for a little bit and was homeless there, and he ended up picking a fight with someone he shouldn't have picked a fight with, and they ended up essentially beating him to death. And just a really sad story. I think he was only in his mid to late 30s, and a really sad story of a genius that through his own ego led to his own self-demise. But a really, really well researched, thorough book. I think Bill Milkowski, who I think worked for a jazz magazine, got to interview Jocko a few times when he was on Weather Report, so he already kind of knew a lot about him. But he talks to a lot of other people that Jocko worked closely with, and who was part of Jocko's inner circle, like a lot of his ex-girlfriends, his wife, his children. But yeah, really well done, a really beautiful book. And for the companion piece, I chose Heavy Weather by Weather Report. I think this has some of his best stuff he ever did with Weather Report, like Birdland, Teen Town's a good one, The Juggler, Havana. It just really showcases his amazing bass playing and just how he really changed the game when it came to jazz and being a bass player in jazz. So highly recommend. You can find these for super cheap. And last but not least, Stay Phonetic, Volume 3 by Henry Rollins. This is such a cool, very personal way to talk about not only music, but Henry Rollins' love of record collecting. Sorry, I'm still getting over being sick. I'm still kind of just like congested and gross in the face, But yeah, Henry Rollins is just such a fanatic when it comes to record collecting and just music in general. Um, this is sort of written out kind of like as a diary where he will talk about like what he's been listening to, or if he's working on a radio show, he'll list out the track list that he's made for a radio show, and then he'll also um, go in depth and talk about like the records he has in his collection, the pressings, and the various pressings he has of these records. And then he'll also like just go on rants about like how he wants to outbid this person on eBay for this Joy Division bootleg, and it kind of just be like, oh, I can't believe they think they're gonna get $500 for this, for this $300 bootleg. But yeah, I think it's not only a great testament of obviously Henry Rollins' love of music, but he also goes back to, being in Black Flag and being friends with Ian MacKaye, and how Ian MacKaye introduced him to certain people, or how he was on tour in this one place, and that's where he got this mixtape that had this band song on it, and that's how he got into the band. Yeah, it's just a really great sort of retrospective of how he became the great music lover and collector that he is now. It's just so much fun, and you can really hear his just very fun and quirky but intellectual way of putting things in music, and the philosophy behind collecting music and just being a lover of music. He just fucking loves music and wants you to know it. So, yeah, this is such a great in-depth book. Not only does he talk about punk, but he talks about post-punk, new wave. He even throws in some jazz. He really does listen to and appreciate all aspects of music, which I really love and can relate to, as I really want to portray that through my videos. But this is a band I really didn't know that much about before reading that book, but Henry loves this band. He talks about this band and the various 45s and albums he has from them. But this is Total's Turn by The Fall. This is a live album taken from 79 in October to February of 1980. But yeah, really, really great. Sort of post-punk, new wave, I guess kind of towards the 80s they kind of turned more into a new wave band, but their 70s to 80s stuff is kind of when they still had a little bit of edge to them. But I really love this album. This is one I kind of just saw someone selling on Instagram and decided to get it based off of Henry Rollins' recommendation through that book. And yeah, I'm not disappointed. Always looking for stuff from The Fall now. But yeah, that was it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have some other great music books that you would like to recommend to me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.